Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Tripod, the audio advertising podcast. I'm Matt Hopper. In this season, we're going to be exploring how advertisers can connect with their customers using audio in all its forms, how to use it, when to use it, with step-by-step guides on everything from linear radio to digital audio. But since we're launching this season at London's Podcast Show 24, we thought we'd look at a brand that uses podcast advertising and ask why and how they use it and what kind of results they're getting. So without further ado, let's introduce our very special guest, Rebecca Alderton, Marketing and Comms Manager for Gressingham Foods. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Rebecca, with the podcast show on this week, podcasts are very much front of mind for all of us. What are you listening to at the moment? Do you have any favourites?
I do have a few podcasts that I enjoy listening to at home and on the commute to work. So I love the Parenting Hell podcast with Josh Widdicombe and Rob Beckett. I'm a parent, so I like listening and laughing along at some of the jinxes that they get up to in that podcast. I also love Diary of a CEO and Motherkind, which is another sort of parenting podcast.
Sounds like you're well entrenched into the podcast medium. Are you fairly new to it, or were you an early adopter?
I'd say for the past 2 or 3 years, no, maybe longer than that, because the Parenting Hell one launched in COVID, and I was all up for listening to that during COVID when we all had a bit more free time on our hands. So I'd say for the last 5 or 6 years I've been enjoying podcasts.
Just give us a brief overview and a bit of background on Gressingham Foods and what role marketing overall plays in the company.
Yeah, so Gressingham Duck are the main UK supplier of duck. So if you consume duck in the UK, it's most likely to have come from Gressingham. We're quite unusual in that we're one of the only brands in the meat, fish and poultry sector. So we use the brand as a real tool to encourage people to cook duck and grow the category. Marketing is very important for us. Duck can be quite an unfamiliar protein to many people, so our job is to give inspiration and give people the confidence to have a go with cooking with duck.
And it is easy, isn't it?
It's much easier than you think.
Yeah. So you've started to include podcasts in that marketing mix. What made you think that podcasts might be right for you? Yeah,
so we had done several radio advertising campaigns in the past, which were very successful for us. Podcasts really appealed because the audience was a good match for us, sort of over 35 and a bit more affluent are generally listeners of podcasts are. We really like the fact that with podcasts you get a listener's undivided attention compared to radio, which sometimes might be sort of on in the background as you're pottering about doing other things in the house or in the car as you're kind of concentrating on other things. But lots of people listen to podcasts through headphones, so you've got that real sort of intimate connection with your listener. We also like the fact that you can use the 3D sound in podcasts, which works perfectly with the headphone listening, and that was appealing to us because we felt that we could really give people the atmosphere of being in the kitchen, so with all the foodie cues that can come along with that, which was something that whenever you're going to be using audio with food, you've got a little bit of a barrier because you haven't got the visual of seeing that cooked dish in front of you. So if you can get those foodie cues with this 3D sound, that was sort of really appealing to us.
Well, the pictures are better in audio because they're all in the head, of course. So you've used a whole array of podcast inventory thus far, from spot airtime to host reads and a complete branded video podcast episode, which we'll come to in a moment. So just harking back to what you said now, I was going to ask what podcasts have added to that marketing mix. And I guess that super engaged audience is what appeals to you. What particular addition has it made to that marketing mix?
Yeah, it's been a very important addition, and I think it's worked well because we have been running other campaigns alongside the podcast. So we've been running some YouTube advertising as well and some sort of online digital advertising. So we find that that's a very effective way of running something. So for instance, you might hear our advert on your morning commute while you're listening in your headphones on the train, and then you might see one of our adverts on YouTube when you're watching a video later in the day. So we find that sort of dual approach is very effective.
Let's go on to the branded episode that you did with Mark Wogan. Spooning was the show. And I want to talk in detail about how that's happened. But it was a lot of fun doing it, I guess, because you were his guest at the time was Paul C. Brunson, love guru from Married at First Sight. Sounds like fun.
It was a brilliant day, yeah. And Paul was very receptive to duck. I think in the episode he mentions how that's one of his happiest childhood memories, is having some nice crispy duck with his family. So yeah, it was great to be involved, great to be able to go along to see it in action. And yeah, Mark is an incredible host.
So I'm wondering how you integrated the Gressingham Duck brand in that podcast, Spooning with Mark Wogan, without making the inclusion of Gressingham Duck gratuitous. I'm going to bring Howard Bareham in now. Howard is media director and co-founder of Trisonic.
Yeah, well, I think with all these things, it starts with talking to the podcast producers and the podcast host. And Spooning is a new podcast from Virgin Radio that was launched in December 2023. And we were in the mid-stage of planning the Gressingham Q1 2024 campaign then. And we knew it had opportunities because it was a new podcast, and through our contacts with the sales team, they knew we were interested in looking at ways of including product, and we're going to talk about that in a minute and how we did it in a sympathetic manner. So the first meeting was with the sales team, but on the same meeting, on the same day, we then also met Mark Wogan, so the host, and the producer Johnny. And it was through those conversations. In fact, we actually went to Mark Wogan's restaurant called Home Slice, which is a pizza place that he has. And we spent a lot of time eating pizza, but also talking and chatting amongst the four of us. So Gemma, who works at News UK, Rebecca, myself, Mark Wogan, and Johnny, the producer, in terms of how we could sympathetically integrate Gressingham products into the podcast. The DNA, I guess, or the focus of Spooning is all about having a guest, which Mark interviews, but it's all about their food from their childhood memories is part of that. And Paul C. Brunson, his favourite childhood memory was crispy duck at home. And what Spooning does, which is a great opportunity for us, is they actually cook those childhood memories for them. So therefore, Gressingham have crispy duck, which you can buy with pancakes and hosting sauce. So it was a perfect way of integrating it sympathetically. And I'll go one step further. Part of it is about the challenge of people thinking duck is complicated to cook. Okay. For those that have done it, it isn't. But for the uninitiated, I guess, or first timers, it is. So he said, well, why don't we do a video of me cooking duck at home? So to make it more sort of resonate with the listener rather than in a big kitchen or a restaurant where professionals may operate. So he was cooking duck at home. So we had two bites of a cherry, I guess, in that sense. But it was a great example of using, the whole campaign was a great example of using all the podcast inventory that is available. So airtime with the 3D audio, which gave us reach on a wider scale, then overlaid with host reads with other shows, which gave us that engagement and the opportunity for those other hosts to talk about it in an enthusiastic manner for the listener. And then this video episode with Spooning with Mark Wogan, and the whole team were fantastic. But it does start at the very start, if you're doing this, to include the production team from the very, very first off to get their input.
And you were heavily involved in that planning process and in that pizza restaurant, eating all that pizza.
Yes, not a bad job, no.
No, indeed. It was fun to do, and goes way beyond what people think of normally when they think of getting involved in podcasts. They think of host reads, they think of spot ads. This is way beyond all that, and allows you, I would guess, as a brand, to use that content in other ways. Give us an idea how you used that.
Yeah, so Mark was kind enough to film some other videos for us on the day as well, which we used. So he filmed a thank you video to thank all of the Gressingham team for being involved in the episode, which I was able to use internally, which sort of helps with a bit of buy-in from sort of internal stakeholders. We used all of the video content on our social media channels. We included an advert for the Spooning podcast in our newsletter, which goes out to 160,000 subscribers. So yeah, we made a very good use of all the content that was provided to us.
It sounds like you got great value out of this particular exercise.
We did.
Has it worked? Has it translated into results? That's what we want to know. Has it worked?
Yes, we have had a very successful Q1 in 2024. So our web traffic was up 70% on the previous time period last year. So that's not all down to the podcast, but that's showing you what a great marketing mix can provide alongside sort of sales promotions and a bit of increased distribution of our products into stores. So we're very, very pleased with how the campaign performed.
Well, it's good to hear that you're getting results, Rebecca. Just for the benefit of other people who might be thinking about using podcasts for their brand, what is involved in terms of the process from your side of things?
So we started off with a brief, which was that we wanted to encourage our target demographic to cook with duck and inspire them with some tasty recipes. So we put that brief out to Trisonic. He then came back with some podcast suggestions for the host reads and a sort of provisional plan for the airtime campaign. So we worked through that with them and picked out the podcast host that we would like to use, and then they sort of took that away and came up with a plan for us that was reaching the brief that we'd set out.
And I must ask you, has that process been smooth and reached your expectations?
It has been smooth, yes. Trisonic really listened to our brief and we felt they really understood what we wanted to gain from the campaign. And it was a collaborative process. We were very involved in every aspect, from briefing the podcast hosts, sending out samples to them, approving scripts when they came back to us, and there were a few challenges along the road, as is often the case, which Trisonic were very receptive to and helped us out a lot with. So we were very pleased with the whole process.
Rebecca, thank you very much, and thank you for listening. Make sure you join us for the rest of Season 2. Well, we'll be joined by Octave's Matt Rouse and Tom Ballum from Mindshare, and we're going into a deep dive on all the audio media options open to clients and advertisers and how to navigate the audio market. Follow the show to make sure you don't miss that, and for more details on audio in all its forms, check us out at trisonic.co.uk.